When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking mode, just like 90% of their customers. Or you can stick with costly options that you probably just turn off. You can get Fastly's all-in-one platform that protects apps everywhere they live, however they're built. Or departments can agree to disagree. You can go to securityweekly.com/Fastly to learn more. Or you can just wish you had. With the skills gap increasing, it's more important than ever to train your staff effectively and efficiently. Offensive Security provides training for your organization designed by the same minds behind Kali Linux. Here are 2 recent offerings from OffSec. OffSec Academy gives you the chance to earn industry-leading OSCP certification with dedicated one-on-one mentoring. You can also try Proving Grounds Enterprise, created exclusively by Offensive Security's InfoSec experts for highly realistic simulated networks. Visit securityweekly.com/offsec to learn more.
Welcome back to Paul Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Larry Pesce, Lee Neely, Tyler Robinson, and Jeff Mann. Our next live webcast will be on April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where you will learn how to prepare for and prevent modern ransomware attacks. Our next technical training will be on May 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern. This technical training webcast will explore common misconfigurations of NGINX, the damage they can do, and how to avoid them. Also join us May 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time again for a technical training with Thycotic to see how attackers gain access to endpoints and learn defensive strategies to protect against those attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, today is the official launch of SW Labs with our first set of product reviews on attack surface monitoring. Thank you, Paul and Adrian, for all your hard work. To see an overview of the category definition, our testing methodology, or the actual product reviews, please visit securityweekly.com/reviews. We have a whole schedule of product reviews coming out throughout the rest of the year. All right, guys, we have a ton of news. Jeff wants to try to get out of here by 9 Eastern, which I don't think has ever happened on this show. I want to start for a second. The federal government had a pretty busy couple weeks while we didn't record last week. I mean, Holy cow. First, if we officially have attribution for the SolarWinds attack, we decided that the FBI is just going to go clean up a bunch of web servers for organizations because they can't do it themselves. The Department of Justice is now going to create a program to prevent ransomware. It's like, what else is the federal government going to do?
Yeah, Jeff, Matt. Yeah, Matt. You know, I think those words have never been said in the same sentence ever before, that the federal government had a busy week in security. So that's the first thing that blew me away.
That's true.
So what's next?
This. Yeah, next. Move on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, how do you start? Like, there is so much to dissect.
We should spend 30 seconds on each story and get through all the stories and end at 9 and set this enormous precedent, much like the federal government did in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. I don't know that we.
How about we start with Jeff's first story?
Yeah.
Wait, you don't have a first story.
Oh wow!
Didn't it post?
Lee? He put it in the notes somewhere. Tell us your first story, Jeff. Come on.
Well, wait, it's not in there.
Well, while Jeff's finding it, the real quick one, tied to some of the federal government stuff about SolarWinds. Did you hear that SolarWinds is changing the name for the company?
No, were they changing it?
No.
Their SolarWinds MSP is becoming N-Able.
What?
Yeah. Now, there's so many jokes already. Like, we enable you to have supply chain hacks. We enable the Russians in your network
to hack us. Yeah.
Like,
I'm curious the attribution side of this. Like, there's a ton of stories on this, but
you were serious, Larry. I thought it was a joke.
I'm serious. No, I'm serious.
Oh my God.
My story number 1.
Wow.
I mean, we kind of knew that's going to happen, right? Like, you have a major breach like this, you have a brand reputation and, total market problem stopper where you search SolarWinds, you're not going to be at the top of the queue, you're going to be SolarWinds breach. So that's kind of inevitable. From that, though, like obviously SolarWinds is going to learn a huge lesson. There's going to be some great security improvements on SolarWinds and supply chain as a whole, hopefully. Most people that go through a breach are really well versed and become very secure after that. But the whole name change, like we can see that. What past that are we seeing from like an attribution standpoint and from like an ongoing securing the SolarWinds breach? Like there's still IR happening. There's still massive holes that need to be filled by companies that are not within sight of the direct chain of command or have, security implications to the federal government or, the stock market. So how do we kind of move past this and make this a positive?
I mean, the cleanup, to your point, Tyler, is still ongoing, right? And so here we are talking about attribution, we're talking about name changes and other things, but I mean, there's still organizations, there's probably some that still don't even know they've been hacked, unfortunately.
That's true. And that comes back to another problem of like, are we in the security industry putting the emphasis on the things that actually matter? Should we be putting more effort towards building a more robust security program, providing good supply chain advice, building out IOCs and helping those companies that maybe don't have a budget or security within inside of their purview, and or that we're seeing, active attacks happening. The whole thing with Exchange and the federal government helping with the Exchange is a great example of that. Like, where does that delineation from? Is it the government's responsibility if they see this kind of stuff happening and they have the capability? Is it the security industry to step up and help that? Like, how do we start to draw some of these lines? Because I think there's some clear lines that need to be drawn, but those responsibility and oversights for the greater good get much more gray and hazy.
The FBI did it, right? I mean, the FBI went in and cleared up these WebLogon issues because companies weren't doing it. Now, the security community obviously identified the vulnerability, created the patches, and then organizations decided to ignore it. The FBI decided in their purview that this was enough of an issue that they were just going to go out and clean these devices for them. Think about the implications of that in your context, Tyler, for a second, right? Because now we have the federal government coming in and going and cleaning up private organizations' messes, security messes. I'm not sure that's a precedent we wanted to set, but now that we set it, can we put the cat back in the bag?
I don't think so. And does that purview only happen to U.S. companies? Or what about U.S. companies that have overseas offices? And or, how does this precedence, like, again, we start to see a very gray and hazy line. And then that goes back to, as security practitioners and people where we see these things in the wild all the time, like, what is that our responsibility to disclose that to the company? Is that our responsibility to help fix? Is that our responsibility to provide some oversight within that and just patch it as we see it? Like, this is an interesting precedence that the federal government nonetheless happened to set on their own.
Yeah. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. But Tyler, I'm glad you took my humorous story into a serious one.
Yes.
I'm
and
always
I like
good
your,
for that.
I like your second one on this. Signal developer turns tables on forensics firm Celebrite and infects the investigators' computers. We were just having this conversation in the last segment with Joel about Wicker and the secure messaging applications, and here Signal's in the news. It looks like they got access and infected a Celebrite machine.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
This is probably my favorite story of the week.
Yeah, and I was talking about with some peers and so forth, and we're kind of pissed, like, the comments about, Moxie's brass balls could be heard clanging together all over the West Coast, and all that type of stuff. Like, they didn't like necessarily the tone of the article, that he sounded like a very ranty 17-year-old or something of the like. But I can understand why the article sort of happened, in that Celebrite came out and said basically, yeah, we can recover all of the Signal messages, which they couldn't. It's effective. Their technology was effectively like handing someone your unlocked phone And like, yeah, if you hand someone your unlocked phone, then they can read all your Signal messages. Like, this is not rocket science. And the article came down. They realized the 404 wasn't good, so some marketing type article was there, and like that really kind of raised the ire of the folks at Signal. So interestingly enough, found that some of the processing within Signal for recovered files allows for remote code execution and that type of stuff. And Tyler, did you read about which particular components were ones that were quite interesting as to allow that to happen?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. Like, at the end of the day, Moxie has been in the community for a long time. Moxie's a hacker. Like, don't piss off the hackers. Like, we've said this on the show before. You don't piss off the hackers. And the way Celebrate came after Signal and kind of their PR and marketing like tone, I think this was just a tat for tat. And honestly, I think sometimes the general public needs this slap on the wrist to understand, like, hey, we spend a lot of time, free time on our own, researching, doing this stuff, helping secure, make the the world a safer place. Don't piss off the hackers. So this is just a great explanation of that. And the remote code execution that they showed was a new kind of attack methodology that I think is great, because it forces these vendors that are spending a ton of money and forcing law enforcement, an underfunded, under-budgeted resource anyway, they're exponentially charging these people, and they're not securing their own product. So they've put files within inside of there that have nice little Easter eggs and will cause the Celebrate not to work, or get misinformation or disinformation, or not even get the information correctly. So I think ongoing, this is a fantastic thing from a security standpoint, because it forces these companies that are doing and selling these major products to do better on security. If you're going to be plugging a technically hostile phone into a device that is on a sensitive network, probably law enforcement, some kind of a FRED or forensics device, then you should make sure that your software is secure and you're not introducing vulnerabilities into that network. That's a very sensitive network.
I'd also argue too, Tyler, that if we can execute code from that malicious device to affect the collection platform, can you trust what the collection platform is collecting?
Effectively, no. Right now,
exactly.
Like, there's going to be some precedents for case law.
Exactly. Like, if I had something on my phone and I used Signal and Celebrate captured the data, you damn right I'd be telling my lawyers that you can't have this data admissible from my phone, because the whole process is suspect. Like, you can't trust the data.
I mean, the other nice thing is, like, Moxie went as far as, like, hey, we have several files that are going to be rotated in, surreptitiously, and like, don't mess with us, and let's get this process right. Otherwise, you can't play with the big boys. And I think this is like a great, like, drop the mic. I don't care what anybody said.
And I thought that was great, the way Moxie put that, is that, hey, by the way, if you're a Signal user, we're going to be putting some files that Signal's going to go out to the internet and get these files, and they're going to store them in the stub, as it were, for aesthetics. Yeah, because aesthetics in your code is important, and we think it looks pretty. So, when this one doesn't look aesthetic anymore, we're going to replace with this new one. It doesn't affect Signal at all. Like, I thought that was just brilliant, and it
was so tactful. And then Paul, like, where is Paul? They made one of the best hacker meme movies I've ever seen.
Yes.
And Paul's not even here to enjoy this. Like, they essentially dropped the mic using hacker movie clips. And it's fantastic. Like, I can't give Moxie enough credit. Like, I don't care, like, really what the security community thinks about this level of scrutiny. The way that Celebrate has always operated, and their level of tact, having dealt with them on multiple occasions, private and public, like, this is just tat for tat, and it is a good boundary, we'll say a healthy boundary to set in the sand, so that companies know that they just can't go pissing all over and saying whatever they think they can say in PR and marketing that has ramifications inside the real world, even though people are putting hard effort into doing the right thing and doing it well.
Yep. I think my favorite part of all of this was that they're using the FFmpeg library. And the version of the FFmpeg library they're using is 9 years old. And according to Moxie, has had more than 100 vulnerabilities reported since then.
That's amazing. Like, come on.
Oops.
Again, we expect better when you're paying an ungodly amount of money for these products and services that these guys provide. And again, like, they are doing great work. I don't want to cut Celebrite too short in the fact that they support law enforcement. They have a hard job to do in an age of encryption and very secure endpoint devices that are tracking bad people that we want to track, we want to bring to justice. But at the same time, like, that doesn't always correlate to good business practices and very transparent and clear marketing and PR.
Yeah, and what the timing of this is really interesting because Celebrite just announced they're going to go IPO through a SPAC. We covered it on Enterprise Security Weekly yesterday. And so now what you get is this really interesting negative marketing jive going on right at the time they're trying to go public.
I did not know that part. That is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very bad timing to have negative press as you're getting ready to go IPO. Just saying.
Again, don't piss off the hackers. Like, we're here helping the community. You don't want to piss off the wrong group that are trying to do the right things.
Yeah. Lee, you've got a lot of stories in here around APTs and 0 days. Where do you want to start?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm thinking we want to keep it quick. Actually, the one that I thought was kind of weird and cool was my number 3 story, the Revel gang. They had stolen data from the Quanta Computer Inc., who related to Apple's new products and designs. And Quanta said, gave them the middle finger on paying the ransom. So now they went over to Apple and said, hey, these guys got your shit. We want you to pay the ransom. And I'm hoping Apple shows them the door. I mean, this is kind of...
Please.
From a ransomware group like that, I think that's a good play from their standpoint. Like, not promoting ransomware by any means, but at the end of the day, like, what is their take? Like, it's Apple. They don't really need the money, and they're going to be very careful from a PR standpoint and setting precedents. So I think they may have picked the wrong battle, and they should have probably stayed with the original path that they were on.
Yeah, because my guess is Apple's not going to pay. And so you
I hope not.
Went through all this effort, right? And what are you going to get out of it? Nothing? Okay.
They're not going to pay from a PR standpoint 100%. And even if they did pay, it would be through back channels and secondary companies. There's no way that they would pay outright and set that precedence and have that visibility or optic. That's just not who Apple has ever been. And nor would they go about doing it in the way that's going to be kind of enlightened through, the main channels.
Yeah.
I am kind of curious what the design, like, when they say they have data, I am very curious around, like, what data they have, because some of the Apple networks are very secure, and some of the stuff that they do protect is, would be a pretty big jump. Again, we go back to supply chain. Yeah, there's going to be supply chain stuff, but even Apple is very careful about when they have to utilize supply chain, compartmentalizing some of that and pushing that to certain phases of production between multiple vendors and manufacturers. Thus, the IP is not completely, pilfered. So really, I wonder how much Apple really cares based on what they know may or may not have been taken.
Yeah. There, NSA's tracking 5 vulnerabilities being actively exploited. A lot of it's product related. Fortinet, Pulse, Citrix, VMware, all in this list. I think, Lee, you had that story as well as I did. Again, here we go. We got this precedent. We got the NSA. All this stuff is being actively exploited. Companies, go update your Fortinets, your Pulse Secures, your Citrixes, or VMware. Otherwise, the FBI might just do it for you.
It's very interesting that they would take the time, or they have the manpower to. It must be serious enough that they're finding an easy way to do this, and in such a way that their lawyers are not freaking out. right? Like we're talking about private held companies inside the United States, outside of jurisdictions. Like this is either serious enough or they've got some kind of loophole inside the legal side of this to make this possible. I mean, obviously this is huge.
Tyler, part of it, they have time because they got out of the end-to-end encryption business.
I mean, we alluded to this, many months ago, maybe a year ago, as the work from home thing became more of a big deal. The consumer and VPN endpoint was going to be attacked. We knew there was going to be 0 days. We knew that APT was going to be targeting this. We didn't know how long it was going to take for a lot of this proliferation to happen. But from our standpoint, like this has been in the works. Like we should have known this. The fact that we don't have auto patching and kind of this auto rollout for critical things like this on our endpoints that touch the internet that are exposed externally, that's kind of concerning.
But Tyler, if you auto patch and it has to reboot, like how do you communicate that to your users? And
UDP.
then your services go down, and you can't get into your VPN at 2 a.m. or when it auto patches at noon on a Tuesday.
Man, communication is really hard. I don't know how many millennia we've been working on this communication things as Homo sapiens, but communication is definitely a problem to overcome. And APT in your network is definitely going to cause some downtime and a lot of inconveniences for your end users. So at the end of the day, I would probably say I wouldn't care. Obviously, the FBI doesn't.
Nope. Guess not.
I mean, The way I see it, if the VPN's down in the middle of the day, like I'm going to go grab a snack. Come back in 10 minutes, see if it's back up. Probably is.
Yeah, like how many MIPS or ARM firewalls on the edge, like from an update, like how many of those take more than 10 to 15 minutes to update, and like what is the overall impact in comparison to the business risk decision of having an APT group have a 0 day that is known? Like, why is this even an issue from a business risk standpoint? That's the kind of the part that baffles me. I get there are change windows, there's processes, there's procedures, but there also has to be flexibility within inside of those to accommodate for criticalities and the known that this is going to happen within inside of any given IT space or IT network.
Some interesting challenges, Tyler, for sure. I don't know if anybody else, Jeff, has a comment.
It's awfully quiet for everybody wanting to get out of here. Like I feel like I'm the only one talking, and I really don't want to get out of here. I just want to talk.
There you go.
Keep talking.
Keep
about
talking.
Yeah, Tyler. We can
I just want to prove that we can do it. That's all.
I'm with you, Jeff. Like, it's been a long day. It's been a long week. So yeah, like getting out on time would be amazing. So.
Yep.
So should we hop over to like the Facebook breach? Are we going to hop over to
let's go Facebook.
Indian brokerage?
Facebook, let's Facebook it.
Facebook's got a couple interesting stories. I mean, obviously with the big data leak, so there's legal action. And we were talking about this on the last segment. It also ties into the whole Facebook Messenger piece where there's active exploits happening. Alex Stamos left Facebook for a reason. And this is why.
And we laugh, which is the sad part. Yeah.
Because they don't care. Like, they want to monetize data. They want to collect as much data as they can. They want to figure out how to monetize this. Like we were just talking with Joel in the last segment. It's a mindset shift, right? Because how many companies have been successful in harvesting all this data and securing it forever where it never gets breached? So here you have Facebook having one of these huge, large breaches in Europe that's going to create GDPR fines and other stuff for them on top of everything else. And they had an opportunity to do things right, but I just don't think they care. And we've covered multiple Facebook stories over the past few years, of these types of activity. They haven't learned.
Well, is it they haven't learned, or from a business standpoint, does it make sense for them to care? Like that's a legitimate question. Like we've went back and forth from the privacy standpoint, and going down sanctions, going down privacy change acts, and different things that affect their business model. What level of effect does that actually have on Facebook's end market cap and where they're making their money. Like if they're making their money on selling off data that most users don't care about, and that 1% that is caring is affecting their bottom line, like a 1% bottom line change doesn't negate them changing a business act or policy, right?
True, but I think there comes a day when people become more aware of the challenges with their data on Facebook or other social media platforms. Because I don't want to rule out just Facebook in this particular case, because I think it potentially impacts all the social medias. When people realize that they want to protect their data, and they don't want to give it up, or they may move platforms. And if you think about the way Facebook makes their money, losing users is not a good way for their ad revenues to continue to increase. And so I agree with you, Tyler, that the current business model and their current revenue model supports, they don't really have to care. But if they lose enough people, or people decide to turn it off or switch, then does it make a monetary difference for them to care?
I think you're 100% correct, but that also relies on the fact that the consumer base that is the general consumer base, like outside of the, call it 3% of people that are starting to care, even the general public that does care, which is getting to be more, you still have the everyday moms, the people running soccer, the people running online businesses via Facebook, the people running private groups and coaching, all of these things that are going to be platform stuck, and or they're just not going to move because that is what they're comfortable with, until that number shifts past a point, which from a business standpoint, I would think would be probably 15 to 20%, just guessing. At that point, then we'll start to see a paradigm shift in the general public and what Facebook has to do to address these concerns. And I think we'll start to see marketing and PR and some maybe, at the surface level changes that will make the business look better. But in the end game, things that actually matter to you and I from a security standpoint and data collection standpoint, I don't see that changing unless there's a massive shift in general economics.
Well, remember, GDPR fines are 4% of revenue? That could be a pretty big chunk of change in a fine if it gets to that level.
That is one of the few that's one of the few that kind of keeps people on their toes. But I'm still trying to figure out, some of these big corporations have to have loopholes within inside of this, or they have really good lawyers, because you still don't hear about some of the major providers getting hit or the aftermath of what that settlement looks like, right? Like maybe they just deal with it at a lower number that doesn't actually affect them. I've yet to see a case study where a large organization such as that has gotten hit with enough that it makes a dividend or dent in order for them to make a massive change. I wish they would. Don't get me wrong. I really do wish that is the case. But from the average consumer standpoint and where you and I are and what we see and know, I just don't see our ability to make that effect happen without a larger buy-in from, I don't know, the general public.
And Tyler, I think about that from the perspective of if they've got to give up 4% of their revenue for fines for GDPR. And then 6 months later they have another breach and they have to pay another 4% of their revenue, and then 6 months later 4% of their revenue. That adds up pretty quick. And I think about this, wouldn't it be in their best interest to take that 4% that they're not going to pay in fines and use it to enhance their security programs and their detection and all of those things, so that in 6 months they don't have another breach, and then they can take that 4% that they would have lost in 6 months to apply to better and enhanced programs for securing their data. And I mean, that makes sense to me, but
I'm sure there's AI and ML algorithms and accounting bots out there that are looking at just that, Larry, and at some point that will happen.
Yep. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Facebook Messenger's under attack. That's WhatsApp under the covers, isn't it? Isn't Messenger the WhatsApp acquisition?
I believe it was part of the acquisition. I don't know if that actually is rolled into the code base yet or not.
Oh, okay. Because we were talking, Wicker and Signal came up in our previous conversation, and I knew that Facebook bought them, and I thought I didn't know if Messenger was leveraging the WhatsApp code base or not, but obviously there's some scams out there on your Facebook Messenger application as well. So Facebook stays in the news. Maybe it's good publicity for them. I don't know.
It's hard to tell. Like, any publicity is good publicity, as they used to say, which I can't imagine is still the case, like with today's mass flood of marketing. But who knows? I'm like, this is going to be a thing. This is a thing that I've had a ton of people reach out recently about Instagram scams, Facebook account takeovers, calendar. Like, I think even Paul was mentioning some stuff around calendar hijacking, where people just schedule a whole bunch of meetings so that you can't actually get anything into your Calendarly booking appointments because someone else has scheduled them, and they're holding them ransom until you click on a link that then downloads malware. Like, there's a million of these kind of attacks, and I don't think we're going to see this slow down at all. The general consumer is either going to have to rely on platforms to provide coverage and security for this, or security companies are going to have to start stepping up and offering solutions to the end user and consumers that are digesting and utilizing these technologies that may or may not be enterprise grade or have some of the security functionalities available to them.
Yeah, we had an interview yesterday with Chris Cleveland from Pixam, because they have a very interesting browser plugin that really helps with malicious site clicks, right? When you think about it, phishing attacks are not just in email anymore. They're coming through text. They're coming through all kinds of different places. And so instead of focusing on the inbox, the mailbox, like a lot of companies do, he said, we're going to do it in the browser, because when you click that link, what's the first thing it does? It opens up a browser tab to go to that page. And so what they do then is they inspect the page and identify that if it's malicious or not, just to help users, not do something stupid like, put in their credentials into a bogus site that looks like Bank of America or Microsoft because they want to do credential harvesting. So there are some solutions that solve parts of that, Tyler, but we're still very, as a user base, we're still very prone to clicking on some of these links and getting exploited.
I really hope that this is something that like Microsoft starts to build into the operating system. I mean, Defender in and of itself, like Windows 10 with Defender and like a decent configuration, is a very hard target. Like, we'll be real, they've gotten very good at what they do. They've got telemetry from every Windows operating system they're pulling down and having ATP and ATD telemetry added into Windows 10 desktop natively for free. As soon as they start to make the user second guess and have a second opportunity for clicking a link, I think when you click a link, it should pop up and say, hey, are you sure you want to click this link? Here's what we found as an inspection piece. And or you have an opportunity now to cancel this before you click it and say, yes, I really do want to click this link. I think adding that secondary thought opportunity for end users, and I think there are products out there starting to do this, that's when we start to see a real shift in change. I mean, Windows 10 by itself is starting to add some serious security bypasses that you have to get around. But I think adding the human layer to that and providing some behavioral change long term, where you're getting a second chance, asking a question, making the user think cognitively around that second, oh, maybe I shouldn't click this. Maybe this is a phishing tech. Maybe I should call my technical friend and ask them if this is legitimate. Those are the things I think will start to make a much bigger difference in these kind of one-off scam things that we're going to see more of.
Like user access control 2.0, like link access control.
Link access control. I like that. See, you should just coin that. Let's just put that down and make some money.
There we go. Link access control. Here it comes to an operating system near you.
You heard it here first.
Let's see. Back onto privacy. So it looks like this British 12-year-old girl is filing a class action lawsuit against TikTok for harvesting data, kids in Europe. So here's another, kind of one of these like, okay, here I am collecting all this data. In this case, it happens to be kids that now there's a lawsuit on this front. So some more data privacy stuff in the news. So
don't you,
this week,
in order to use TikTok, don't you have any EULA that you sign up or you give them your birthday? Like, there are, like, this isn't their first rodeo. Yeah, they've maybe moved some of their stuff to the U.S., but this is still a China-based company, correct? So do they actually care?
I don't know. Well, I mean, they paid $92 million to settle a lawsuit in the U.S. So, maybe that's their best case scenario outcome, or does this one get a little more expensive for them? I don't know.
That's a good question. Being in the EU, that may get more expensive, but it also sounds a lot like a tort claim and some lawyers that found a girl that uses TikTok to kind of run a cause. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that happens. I mean, you need somebody to start the class action lawsuit. So who knows what the settlement could be on something like this. Yeah.
I don't know. After seeing the last TikTok and when we started to ban it from, every phone on the planet, no one wanted TikTok in their, corporate network. And then TikTok went up in use almost 5-fold. This last a month, maybe two, again, this goes back to the consumer's behavior and what the end user actually cares about. At the end of the day, they want to be able to click on a TikTok. They want to see some funny shit and move on with their day.
Yeah. I did pull this Nigerian email scammer story sent down for 40 months in the U.S. in order to pay back $2.7 million to victims. So think about this for a second, right? So you get caught. Not only are you going to jail, you now need to pay money to your victims.
How are they going to get that money?
I don't know. It's a disincentive. it disincentivizes hacking to an extent. But what if he doesn't have that money anymore? What if that money's gone? Where does that money come from to pay these victims?
From having dealt with some of the victim systems, there's legitimately not a great use case for the victims. The victims usually don't see that. If they do, it's in small $50 payments because who's going to hire a felon? How are they going to make money after that? There's no, it does disparage that from a criminal standpoint. But at the end of the day, when you're provided a third world option of here's the risk versus here's what you maybe could make, and here's the alternative of making 2 cents a day, there's not a whole lot of options when you're starting to talk in that kind of demographic. And I think that's people get really pissed off at the scammers until they really watch and see some of how that lifestyle works and what they actually get paid and what the life choices are and why they do what they do. I don't agree with what they do, but you can also see and understand why they do what they do to an extent. And from that, then you can correlate, we're probably not going to change that unless we're doing that from a entire country economic standpoint down, where we're helping and facilitating other means of gaining income that is substantial or with inside the means of what they're getting from scamming. Whether we're providing that and changing an entire country, that's when we start to make a difference.
Yes.
Is anybody else on the show? Is it just you and me?
Yeah,
Matt?
I think it's just you and me. I'm where are all the stories?
Tyler, you're going deep with some of the stuff, Nigerian scammers, and we've got to change the world. I'm
Tyler's on a roll.
I mean, he's right, but whew, those are some pretty lofty goals, my friend. And
we always shoot for the stars here at Security Weekly, don't we?
Sometimes we shoot
the
at stars,
idealist of the bunch. You'll never be a curmudgeon.
Someday I aspire to be you, Jeff.
One can only hope.
One can only hope.
You need to work for an end-to-end encryption company at some point in your life.
The NSA,
right,
here I come.
Yeah, little lighter one, if you don't mind. Dimitri posted a good one that ties the story in. We're here from the government. Here's your cheese. But did you hear that Dutch supermarkets ran out of cheese after a ransomware attack?
I want to buy some cheese.
Yeah, cheese. Right.
Wow, Jeff, that was very hipster of you.
Hipster? That was Monty Python.
Oh, okay. There's that new thing with cheese or whatever it is. I think that's some TikTok thing.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, boomer. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Wow. In any case, one of the suppliers, supply chain logistics folks for delivering a good portion of the cheese to the Netherlands got hit by a ransomware attack and they couldn't perform any deliveries.
That's interesting,
It's not
Larry.
necessarily-
I think
it's not that the cheese got locked up. They just couldn't figure out where to deliver the cheese.
Right.
wow,
Right.
that's amazing.
Yep.
I think in
These
an
are very
ICS
large
class
warehouses.
taught
You
by
just don't look.
Justin,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an interesting packet capture from an ICS course that Justin Cyril teaches for Control Things IO that evaluates live data from the internet that's public around a cheese factory in the EU or back that way somewhere, and that's interesting.
Yep.
Could be
Quote
the
from
same
the article. We could no longer receive orders from customers, Baker director Tween Verhoeven told the authors. And in our warehouse, we no longer knew where our products were. These are very large warehouses. You just don't go looking for a pallet.
Wow. This goes back to the ransomware, right? Like we're running into this more and more like industry wide. Ransomware is a problem. We know this, but why is it a problem? Like, how are we not addressing this as a security community? Ransomware is
because you need that
typically
two-layer
not
click
super
thing.
sophisticated. Well, it's not super sophisticated, like from the standpoint of like what we're doing in security layers, how we're like addressing budgets and providing. Like most of ransomware can be stopped with some simple configurations and some freeware. Like, why are we not doing those things? There's an entire
that two-layer click thing that you talked about, Tyler. Like, that would solve a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Like these seem like simple issues from a security standpoint that we need to start addressing, like provide guidance. There's so much guidance out there. I think people have gotten information overload, but how do we get the proper guidance into the general public or even just the enterprise public where they can, at the very base minimum of what we're doing in society, protect themselves from ransomware? Like, don't allow, workstation to workstation communication. Don't let something start to encrypt a whole bunch of files. Like, this seems like something that as a security community with a bunch of smart people, this information overload should be stopped at a high level where we can provide simplified justification and understanding. Here is something you run to affect some change so you don't get ransomware and we can have our cheese the next day. Like, this seems like a problem that should be solved.
Yep.
And yet
I
we
agree
still
with you,
talk
Tyler.
about it every day.
Tyler,
so here's how we're going to solve it.
Yeah, there's got to be a button. There's got to be a button that somebody can press. Like, there's so much guidance out there that, like, yeah, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, like, and you should configure your network like this. But yeah, like that takes time and effort, and you need to have staff, and there's going to be some potential disruption. Like, there needs to be a button or a link that someone can click. The button that someone can press and say, "Yep, I'm going to solve the ransomware problem because we're going to implement all of these things with a button press that takes all that guidance into account."
So does that fall back to like vendor problems, like where we are selling smoke and mirrors still as vendors and blinky lights? And from a security community, like, yeah, we know like vendors are an issue. Yeah, every vendor is going to solve the world's problems. Every vendor solution fixes the ransomware problem. Like, okay, is that a problem with the vendor selling something that's not there, or they can't obtain as most customers because of budget? Is that something as a security community we're not articulating properly, and thus the general public can't understand it? Is that our inability to communicate? Like, where is the fail and the short gap here?
So I want to take this from a couple angles, Tyler, because you bring up a very good point. Basic hygiene. It's not very sexy, right? I've been saying this for years. Misconfiguration is going to hurt us well before, some of these 0 days and other things. But we've got vendors in the space that are building these really sophisticated, advanced, like next generation things. But we're not just doing the basics anymore. Like, what happened to like the critical control, like top 10, top 20 critical control list, right? Like I take an inventory, I do an inventory.
Matt, we don't have to do them anymore because we've put all our infrastructure in the cloud.
Oh, yeah. So you still don't have to do that on your endpoints? Wait, that's not in the cloud. Wait, hold on. So
endpoints are out of scope because we use end-to-end encryption.
And I love the way that just Jeff delivered that and went like deadpan, like.
here we are.
Sorry, it's my daily
So Larry,
life.
you want to create a button until somebody inserts malicious code into the button.
Exactly, because that's where I'm going.
Exactly. So if you create a button to do it. So back to Tyler's point earlier, Microsoft has made some really great enhancements on the OS side. The question is, why are some of these things kind of done by default at the OS layer? I mean, wouldn't that be a way to resolve some of this stuff? Instead of the Justice Department creating a task force that's going to come up with the special button that some hacker is going to hack to just deliver ransomware instead of preventing ransomware.
Yeah, that goes. I mean, again, we're trying to solve something that has so many facets. There's lots of complex business decisions. There's lots of operability and business risk and making money. I get that, but does that just mean we need to start getting back to the simplicity of coming back to the basics and at least having, hey, you need to be this high to even ride the internet?
So let me interject. I mean, I might have mentioned it on one of the earlier segments, but let me have a PCI moment. Fundamental problems that we're wrestling with: secure configurations, patching, hardening of systems. They're all PCI requirements.
Okay, so
and yet, if you use end-to-end encryption, you don't have to do anything because encryption magically solves all your problems. Just ask Bruce Schneier.
No, so I don't disagree with you, Jeff, and I believe that compliance has had its place where it's been able to affect change and force that down from a standpoint of industry verticals. So take that one step further, though. How do we, as security professionals, provide that guidance and compliance to places that don't have to fall under that? Or if they do, they fall under a different one that may or may not have as good of controls or be as mature as something like PCI. Or where it shifts out to a shared responsibility role to the cloud, and then it gets even more muddy, and end users that don't understand this technology, then how are they supposed to understand that and realize who actually is responsible, and how do they deal with that?
Well, you started throwing in too many ors, but my response to one of your first ors is fundamentally, I don't believe that patching and hardening and secure configuration should be security responsibilities. Those are the responsibilities of IT developers, admins, all sorts of regular folks, where there's a security function as part of their job. But it's the fundamental problem. I brought this up on a couple weeks ago on Security and Compliance Weekly. We were talking about security awareness training. I said the fundamental problem that we haven't really successfully tackled as an industry is people think one of two things in organizations, at least in the private sector. Organizations where they haven't been doing security forever, there is no core competency, they just kind of, we have to do security because some compliance regimen like PCI comes along and says we have to. Two problems. One, security is somebody else's problem in the organization. It's not my problem. That's not part of my job. Two, everything I'm using in terms of applications and functionality and access must be secure, because otherwise I wouldn't be allowed to use it. I shouldn't have to think about it. Those are the two fundamental problems I believe that we struggle to address.
So psychologically, like, how do we make security sexy again, right? Like, how do we make security great again? That
Tyler,
comes down
you need to be the poster boy, obviously.
Or do we eliminate or wait, I'll give you another one. Maybe we get rid of the CISO and make security the responsibility of everybody, and then it's not somebody else's job.
AKA build a culture of security.
True. Right.
So if we build a culture of security, we come back to, all right, we're building us a culture of security from an enterprise level. How do we affect change globally? How do we affect change outside of just our current enterprise? Like, yeah, there's good enterprises out there that do good security. How do we make that spread? And I think by bringing that and making that personal with inside the consumers, making this valid and personal to them and showing them how this relates to them personally, taking those habits home, teaching those to the next generation, and inspiring people to pick up and want to be more secure and want to do a better job. Fundamentally, that's a human problem. That's a psychological problem. How do we make people want to be better?
It is a human problem. Go ahead, Larry.
Jeff, you need to send a whole bunch of curmudgeon pills over to Tyler, because wow. Yeah, maybe we just need to send curmudgeon pills to everybody, Tyler.
Maybe.
Now, if we lock down the internet, create end-to-end encryption across the entire thing, and just make the more secure system, who cares about functionality, we solve the consumer problem.
Well, I want to actually attempt to answer Tyler's lofty question. The way it's ultimately going to be done, and everybody hates to say it, is through regulation. PCI came into an existence in a large part because the card brands and the banks and the payment processors got tired of paying all the costs of replacing stolen credit cards, because in the early days they were everywhere. And they did it preemptively to keep the government out of their shorts, because at the time, Visa, for example, was a privately held company. They've since gone public, and they didn't want government coming in and finding out how many gazillions of dollars they make and have all sorts of regulation. This is not written down anywhere. This is folklore. But PCI succeeded in large part because everybody kind of bought into we don't want government involved, and that's generally the feeling of people at hacker and security conferences. Remember when we used to go to them? But I've also at the same conferences, especially in terms of ransomware and this and that and the other thing going wrong, ICS and the Internet of Things, everybody boils down to, well, we need the government to step in and regulate. There is no other way.
So you're saying we need to affect change through making it cost people money. Like that. Again, this goes back to the psychological thing. By enforcing a negative, typically change happens in very slow and methodical, unremarkable means. By enforcing positive, where you're using something like Pavlov's box or one of the others where you're enforcing the positive rather than the negative, that's when you start to see real change. So I come back to, how do we affect this positively and make this something that companies want to buy into, rather than forcing them through a monetary, this is a business risk decision, and if the government doesn't get involved and it only costs us this much, then we don't really need to change. Like this is a shift in an entire society and a mindset that I just have a hard time figuring out where we can enforce this without having the buy-in of a whole societal, mindset shift.
Oh, I hate to burst your bubble, Tyler, but nobody cares.
Yeah.
Hey, you didn't get hacked today. Here's a lollipop.
Where's my cookies?
Carrot, right. It's the old carrot and the stick scenario, right? And unfortunately, the carrot hasn't been working, so then it's the stick. And if we think about how we started this news segment for a second, right? The federal government had a couple busy weeks. If we don't want the federal government to step in and tell us what to do, or actually do it for us, then we better figure out how we want to address some of this stuff, because there's been some very interesting precedents set in the last couple weeks that it's like, or we just let the federal government do it for us.
Yeah, how does that fall under a purview and or a budget and or where are we getting the personnel to handle this? We're already short with inside the industry, and government doesn't pay that well. And people doing this are true heroes at this point, because they're saving some companies' asses. All right, how do we not let this precedence go and get to a point where we're now a draconian society and the government just handles it all and it's on the government's infrastructure and they get to see everything anyway? Are we going to be China?
Let's hope not. But you bring up a very good point. It's up to us, the industry, I think, and to the vendor community to continue to come up with innovative ways and maybe more simplistic ways to solve aspects of this. Back to Larry's point, give me the button. right? But I got to secure the button and all the source code behind the button and the supply chain for the button if I want to do this in an easy way. But maybe sometimes it is just people going back and looking at the basics and saying, hey, is there a better way to solve some of this stuff and just get like our baseline of security up a little bit, like raise that bar just a bit. Doesn't have to be perfect, but if we can raise it enough where some of the basic attacks and the basic ransomware attacks can be prevented or at least harder to pull off, wouldn't that make us all better at the end of the day?
Yeah, when was the last time we seen a real true innovation from a security standpoint? Like thinking about that and like challenging us as hackers, us as like the top 10% of people trying to solve these problems. What was the last major innovation that made you go, wow, okay, that may have an effect to something? I think it's been a little while.
I think it was Secure Shell.
No, I thought it was those guys at Black Hat like 2 years ago, like what Golden Crown or whatever it was, that had that new encryption thing.
No, don't go there, Larry.
No.
But to Tyler's point on the innovation, like what was the huge innovation? It was crap.
But why is that? Like we got rid
of password expiration.
Mm-hmm. Woohoo! Like, does this come down to an entire societal buy-in of like changing what is monetarily valuable? Like, if we took away credit cards, if we took away PII and like your social security number, where it wasn't useful or valuable anymore on the dark web, and we redesign that into a secure, more modernized version, if those two things went away, like from a criminal standpoint and from a digital breach standpoint, like where is the monetization? Where is the risk? And why? What's the incentive to hackers to hack a corporation? That really leaves IP, right? And that's a little bit easier to secure, at least from that standpoint.
Which means we're going down the cryptocurrency path. We're going to have federal cryptocurrency, and the federal government will track where all money goes, and there will be no incentive to steal crypto because the government knows exactly where it goes.
I mean, at least taxes might be easier then.
Yeah, it would be actually.
Yeah, and then how would you prove that crypto is actually yours? Like, what's the security mechanism?
Blockchain and ML and AI are for, buddy.
Sure, but how does the crypto and the AI and the ML know it's me? Like, there's got to be something to tell them.
It's called know
damn
your
it,
customer.
It's 901.
It's a federal banking law, because that's what's going to happen when the Fed step into crypto. All the regulations around the financial system and know your customer and all those other things are going to come into play. They'll know exactly who you are. They know where you live, and they'll know exactly what you spend your money on, Larry.
No, they won't, because that wasn't me that transferred those funds. That wasn't me that transferred those funds. Somebody had access to my computer.
But that comes back to, again, if we take away the digital identity piece and we take away the monetary or credit card number piece of this, then we're talking about a little bit smaller pie to have to solve, right? Like then we're coming down to, again, the federal government right now is stepping in and patching our systems. Are we talking much further off from like where we're at now, or a much worse place? If we're talking about them, stepping into cryptocurrency, like that's not far off, because we're not doing a good job in any area of security.
Yeah, we're not far off. And that's what scares me a little bit. All right, I'm going to respect Jeff's time. We're like 2 minutes over, but I think we beat this horse to death. So, gentlemen, thank you for co-hosting with me tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And don't worry, Paul is back next week, so he'll see you next week on Paul's Security.
2 hour news back again next week.